Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Solo Spooky Story. My name's Rob, and today I'll be your host. For those of you that don't know, the Solo Spooky Stories are shorter episodes every other week presented by myself, where I'll just talk about something that I find particularly interesting or something that's been submitted by a listener, which we actually have today, or just kind of something else that myself or Suze have found that we want to talk about. So, yeah, I hope you're all having a lovely day whenever it is you're listening to this, and we are going to get into it. So, as I said, this is from a listener, Amanda. Thank you very much for submitting this. It is a spooky case. It's a proper spooky case, and one that I actually hadn't heard of before. So we're talking about Curraghchase House in Limerick in Ireland. So, you know, we're at home today, what we're talking about. And Amanda, thank you very much for sending this in. Is a frequent listener to the show and is constantly engaging with us on Instagram. So thank you. Please continue your engagement. It's great. Love seeing your messages come into us. So as I said, we are back in Ireland today and we're talking about Curraghchase House, which is, from what I can see, one of the most haunted buildings in Ireland, allegedly. And I'd never heard of it. I had genuinely never even realised that there was a place in Ireland this creepy. And we have our fair share of creepy buildings. So, you know, this one, the fact that it went under the radar, I'm surprised, but it's nice. I love finding stuff that I haven't heard of before. It's great. So it's described online as one of Ireland's enigmatic ancestral homes, which is a great way to start. And yeah, it's just a really, really interesting house. It's got a lot of history to it. It was the residence of the De Vere family at certain points throughout history. And yeah, they're kind of the main family that's kind of tied up in all of this and seem to be kind of the focus of the paranormal aspects to this house. Yeah, they're an interesting bunch. So obviously it's tied up in Anglo-Irish history. It's an old house in Ireland with ancestral like aristocracy roots, of course it is. It's also had some issues during the War of Independence and Civil War and things like that as well. And in recent generations, I suppose, it's become more known as a paranormal hotspot within Ireland, or at least for those in the know, because apparently I'm not enough in the know. But the interesting thing about it as well is that the area around it has actually been designated as a special area of conservation. So you actually get a lot of like hikers and naturalists and bird watchers and things like that coming into the area as well. So it's kind of this really interesting mix of history, nature kind of being left to run and do its own thing there, and then also paranormal enthusiasts coming in to try see a ghost. So the original manor was built beside a man-made lake, and it was kind of in this, I suppose, glacial valley. So there's like an old like woods there and everything. And yeah, the house was kind of built up over time, as is the case with a lot of these houses, and it was kind of renovated and changed. And you know, I think it's fair to say that not many of these houses in Ireland look the same as they started out. And you know, the house kind of was persistent throughout Irish history up until around 1941, when there was a fire basically, and it burnt down. So with that, a lot of its, obviously, the materials within the house itself was lost, but I think also there was a lot of like historical items and artifacts that were lost to this fire as well. And it kind of brought a conclusion to the house being in use. So the land, as I said, it's in a historically kind of important area as well. Like prior to the De Vere's arrival in the area, there's a lot of archaeology in the area. There's a lot of like cairns and ring forts. There's a number of standing stones actually across the estate itself. And yeah, it's been a pretty active area throughout history. Coming into like the medieval period, the Fitzgerald family was kind of very, very active in this area. Yeah, there was a lot of stuff involving like Cromwell and stuff here as well. So it's, you know, pretty active. And in 1657, Vere Hunt, who was an officer in Cromwell's army, and we're going to pretty quickly get over Cromwell because we don't want to talk about him here. He was granted the estate as part of the plantations, basically. The estate at the time, which was called Curra, which I believe was loosely translated from Older Irish as Marshy Plain. It was initially 380 acres, and it was actually seized from the Fitzgerald family and given to this officer. So yeah, Vere Hunt allegedly traced his lineage all the way back to Aubrey de Vere I, who was a companion of William the Conqueror. and basically tried to lay this claim as it being an Irish settlement that could be traced all the way back to the English conquest of Ireland, effectively, and that he was this Anglo-Irish elite that got to live in this house. And yeah, over the kind of the following generations, the Hunt family expanded their holdings and their influence in the area. And by the early 18th century, John Hunt had extended the land further, while their descendants kind of got like additional titles and things like that. It was really kind of John Hunt that extended land quite a bit. So yeah, there's kind of some interesting characters in this De Vere / Hunt family kind of line. Probably the most famous of them all is Sir Vere Hunt, and he was described as a colourful member of the family. He was recognised for his heavy drinking and his gambling, and apparently had a numerous amount of ill-fated business ventures. And yeah, he tried to set up a settlement in Tipperary called New Birmingham, which, why not? It's the most English thing I could think of to do. And yeah, he even apparently spent time in prison and everything for basically trying to just do whatever he wanted, effectively. So he was a bit of a character, and I think he kind of like sullied the family name to a certain extent. So as I said, the house was built up over a period of time. Really, kind of by the 18th century, the house kind of became this grand facade that we would all know now, looking at pictures and stuff of it, and what we would still see now, even in the ruins of it today. And yeah, so it's this really just like elaborately constructed house. Like, there's a lot of like limestone walls, there's plinths, there were kind of elaborately molded like window surrounds and kind of like classical motifs going back to kind of like French architecture and things like that. Like they were really trying to make it look grander, I suppose, than it initially was. There was even kind of like an intention to make it as some sort of like stately home, effectively, that like visiting monarchs could come here and stay here. Like that was kind of what they had in mind. And yeah, so it really was this like large building, and it really kind of maintained this kind of dominating presence over the landscape until it was obviously burnt down. Yeah, it really just kind of was this huge building. So the interesting thing about this whole house is that it now has this reputation as this area where supernatural events have occurred. And some would say that even the stories of supernatural and paranormal events actually kind of exceed its historical and architectural fame. And as I kind of dug into this more, I discovered that there's like ghostly tales of this site are kind of pretty consistent throughout its entire history. There's a bit like it kind of does intensify in the kind of like late 19th century into the early 20th century. But from what I can see, like they're pretty present all throughout the building's history, which is I find quite interesting, because a lot of these other houses, it's really kind of the 20th century when, or I suppose maybe the late Victorian era, early 20th century, that they really become more reports come out of ghostly happenings. But this one is actually more consistently throughout its history. So the earliest surviving, I suppose, explicit reports date from the 1930s. And the reason why I'm talking about this now is because there's actually like quotes from people that were there. So so that's the one I'm going to focus on initially. So there's a diary entry that was authored, I suppose, by one of the guests that were staying there. Their names were Veronica and Mary Gillibod, and they were basically staying there in the summer. They were there in I think like the late 1930s, so not that long before it actually burnt down. And they were holidaying there as English aristocrats did at the time. They actually, in their diary entry, were quite, I suppose, factual about what they were talking about. So the exact quote from the diary is, poltergeist activity was so strong in the house that the De Veres, and indeed the servants, were becoming very alarmed. The sound of footsteps and doors opening and closing in unoccupied rooms were happening nearly every night. Furniture was being moved around, and also apparently a little boy had been seen a number of times by guests. So they go on then to talk about, there were kind of more persistent disturbances. They talk about echoing footsteps, doors opening and closing by themselves, furniture being rearranged in empty rooms, and just this building, I suppose, anxiety within the house itself and the staff that work there. So this is really your I suppose your classic paranormal haunting. You know, the furniture being moved, the footsteps, all that sort of stuff. It's in things that we've talked about before, but I appreciate that it's such just a factual account that's written in this diary. Like, they're very matter of fact about it. Like, this is just what happened, and they're very open about it. So with all of these bits and pieces going on, especially the kind of the sightings and the experiences in the 30s, the family, particularly Mrs. DeVere, who lived here at this point, she called in a priest, and it was Bishop Handley Moole of Durham, which is a mouthful. And I've seen him kind of described as this kind of eminent Anglican, who he was basically very well known, and she basically invited him to Curraghchase to cleanse the house effectively. That she was that concerned about it. So she performed this she organized for him to perform this exorcism effectively on the house, which, you know, why not? It's not really something that, like, I think Anglican priests are well known for. So I just thought it was quite interesting that she took this approach. And allegedly, she reported afterwards that the house itself contained, quote, restless spirits, but not at all distressed or worrying. Not 100% certain what that means, but I think the implication there is that the exorcism, while it happened, may not have been 100% successful in cleansing the house, but that the spirits that remained at least weren't causing problems, I think. So the exact details around the exorcism's aftermath, though, they are lost, so I'm kind of just speculating there. But unfortunately, the diary entry that I talked about doesn't kind of give any additional commentary on it. But yeah, it's just interesting that due to what was going on, an exorcism was actually performed on the house. Going back in time then, we've got a classic viewing here. And this is a legend that's surrounding the house. And it's, of course, a woman in grey. You can't be a haunted old house without having a lady in grey. And the interesting thing about this is that this woman in grey is actually confused with another spirit that's there, who's the Lady of the Lake. So there's two separate spirits fighting against each other, and people are getting confused about which one is which. So the woman in grey is allegedly had been sighted by a groundsman. He was said to have witnessed this silent veiled figure drifting among the trees, and that as he kind of approached her, she vanished before he could actually question her. So she, I think, was seen near the lake, so that's led some people to describe her as the Lady of the Lake. And there was another sighting then described where basically there was someone down by the lake and they saw someone in the reflection of the surface of the lake beside them, and when they turned around to see who it was, there was no one there. That in itself is terrifying. Just the thought of that would not be one for me. But yeah, so this woman in grey is not the Lady of the Lake. That's allegedly a completely different spirit who's in this area, as I said. And that kind of leans more into deeper Irish folklore, where rivers and lakes and things like that are these kind of like liminal spaces associated with banshees, the fae, kind of tragedy, all that sort of stuff. And there's a lot more like ladies of the lakes and things like that associated with that. So I think that might be where some of the confusion comes from. But yeah, that woman in grey sighting, there's numerous accounts throughout the history of the building, going like all the way back through to like the 30s, where this veiled woman appears kind of walking either through the building or through the gardens, and as people approach her, she disappears, or they can't find her, basically. So it's pretty consistent throughout history of this house. As I mentioned earlier, there was some poltergeist activity reported. The report from the 30s is by no means the only report of it. It's just the most detailed. So allegedly over the decades and generations that the house was there, visitors actually repeated claims of poltergeist activity. They talked about cold spots in the house, the sensation of being watched. They actually, and I found this one really, really interesting, they talked about hearing musical notes or like a harp being plucked, and they could hear the sounds drifting through corridors, which that's something that I've never really heard of before, and I find it both fascinating and terrifying. But I just thought it was really, really interesting. They also talk about flickering lights in windows, and the interesting thing about the flickering lights in the windows is there's no electricity on the site, so there's this implication that it's like maybe a candle or something like that. But I just found that quite interesting. And the other, I suppose, famous account that I saw involving all of this was there was an artist who was staying at the site, and they actually sketched this apparition of this ghostly young girl coming down the staircase. I did find it online, so I'll share it on Instagram when you see it, but it's allegedly of a sighting in the area. And of course, there's also the classic there's allegedly a headless coachman who drives spectral coaches across the grounds, and that these phantom harpists are also heard basically announcing the approach of this coachman. And it generally plays around the early hours of the morning, 3 a.m., the usual sort of stuff. But, you know, you can't beat a good headless coachman, which is just brilliant. So to kind of round it out then, I've just got some witness testimonies kind of going through some quotes of people who've stayed there. So I talked about the two ladies in the 30s that stayed there. They had additional quotes in their diary. So they said that the sound of footsteps and doors opening and closing in unoccupied rooms were happening nearly every night. Furniture was being moved around, and also apparently a little boy had been seen a number of times by guests. Mrs. Devere was so alarmed that she contacted the bishop. He arrived and conducted a private service of exorcism. He said that there were restless spirits, but not at all distressed or worrying. So it's just kind of given more context there to that exorcism that I talked about. The groundsman then, there's been numerous reports from groundsmen throughout the years, and there's one that stood out to me actually, talking about the woman in grey. A groundsman, he said, "I saw her at a distance, a woman in grey, moving among the trees by the lake. She was silent. I approached her, but she did not talk." I just found that quite interesting. Yeah, I suppose I talked about that difference between the woman in grey and the lady of the lake. I think the distinction that I found here is there was one quote from someone who allegedly stayed there at Christmas. It was a guest of the De Veres. And this guest actually said, "Each Christmas Eve, a pale veiled figure glides silently across the surface of the lake. Her identity remains unknown. Some link her to disturbances throughout the house, others to a more ancient tragedy. She appears just before midnight, moves soundlessly, then vanishes without trace." So I think that might be the confusion there, potentially. I don't know. It could be the same person, for all we know. But no, there's allegedly some distinct difference between the two sightings of the women. And yeah, so the last account that I want to give is actually to the 1941 fire. So there's actually an account of the night of the fire. So it's from a woman who was working there, one of the staff in the house. And she says, "At around 2 a.m, I," and then in brackets, Kitty Burke, servant, "was awoken by the sound of a bell ringing. It was the library bell. I went to the library door and noticed a lot of smoke coming under the door from the room. I knocked on Mrs. De Vere's door, and upon getting no answer, went in and called her. 'What's wrong?' she asked. I replied, 'There's something happening in the library. There's a lot of smoke.' Mrs. De Vere, in a calm voice, said, 'We have to stay cool, Kitty.' All three of us got out safely." It seems to be the implication there that maybe the ghosts saved her. They rang the bell in the library, drew her attention to the fire, and then they all left the house, potentially. I saw some memoir quote say that this fire basically lifted a curse that was placed on the house. And yeah, allegedly on the night of the fire, the woman of the lake, the lady of the lake, or the grey woman, we don't know which, she was allegedly seen outside the house after this. And that she seemingly was there to witness it or something like that, and that by her presence being there, there was a suggestion that a curse that had been placed on the house had been lifted by the fire. Just all really, really interesting. But yeah, that kind of concludes it. I don't really want to get into like kind of, I suppose, skeptical perspectives or paranormal theories on it. I want to leave you to make up your own mind on this. But yeah, I just found it really, really interesting that this house exists here. It's been used all throughout history. You know, we're talking like the 15th century, 16th century, right through to the 20th century. And it's still there. Like you can go visit the ruins of the site. People do. There's numerous YouTube videos and accounts of people going there and looking at the site. And yeah, it's just really, really interesting. Like it's just something that I found, it just kind of piqued my interest and I wanted to talk about it. But yeah, with that said, as I said, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. You can reach out to us on social media. You can get us on Threads or Instagram at the Spooky AF Pod. You can get us on YouTube in the comments. And yeah, you can also send us an email at thespookyafpodcast@gmail.com. I would love to hear your thoughts on this. Have you been there? I'm surprised with how popular this case is that there doesn't seem to be more stuff out there of people just kind of going up to it and writing about it and taking videos. As I said, there's numerous YouTube videos and things there, but it doesn't seem to be as well known as it maybe deserves to be. So I'd love to know if you've been there or if you know anything about the site. And if I've potentially missed anything, do let me know. I'd love to update on this in the future. But with that said, I hope you're having a lovely day whenever it is you're listening to this, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take it easy, guys.